I had a church member send me this. I'm sure it's a legend, but a store evidently sells husbands. You can go there and get one. This one particular young lady was tired of trying to find, a good husband and didn't want to do the online stuff. So she went to New York and went to this store. Evidently, there are instructions when she arrived. The store operated according to these. It said you can visit the store only once in your lifetime. There are 6 floors in all, and the attributes of the men increase as you go up the floors. There is a catch. You can choose any man from a particular floor, or you can choose to go up to the next floor, but you cannot go back down once you've gone up. Just in case you're wondering, what to do if you go there, it may exist. I'm not quite sure. But at any rate, this one young lady decided to give it a try. She walked into the lobby. There was a set of doors ahead of her that said, the men on this floor, the first floor, have good jobs and love God. She thought, that's pretty good. But I wonder what's on the second floor. So she went up to the second floor. The elevator doors opened, and a sign on the door just across the hallway read, these husbands have good jobs, love God, and love kids. She thought, that's good. That's really good. But I wonder what's on the next floor up. So she went a floor up. On the third floor, the sign said, these men have good paying jobs, love the Lord, love kids, and are extremely good looking. Oh my, she thought. But she was compelled to keep going. She went up to the fourth floor, and the sign read, these men have well-paying jobs, love the Lord, really love kids, are extremely good-looking, have a consistent romantic streak, love kittens, and long conversations. She thought, wow, this is great. Sounds like the guys at Clearwater, doesn't it? But at any rate, she said, should I settle for one of these? What might be on the fifth floor? So she went up the elevator. The sign read, these men have great-paying jobs, love God, really love kids, are extremely good looking, have a sensitive romantic streak, love kittens, long conversations, and love to do housework and cook. Wow. She was tempted to stay right there and choose one of those men. She wondered, what's on the next floor? And so breathlessly she got on the elevator. The doors opened. A sign just across the hallway read over a door marked exit. There are no men on this floor. This floor exists solely as proof that women are impossible to please. I didn't think that was funny, actually. In fact, it has nothing to do with my sermon. Actually, it's impossible to find a perfect husband and a perfect wife, right? They don't exist. Frankly, what you need is a perfect shepherd, and that does. Psalm 23 is where we left off. Let's pick it up at verse 3, where David writes, as he continues to brag on his perfect shepherd. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. And now notice this phrase here. He restores my soul. The Hebrew verb for restore has the idea of repairing. It's a shepherd's term. It has the idea of causing one to be returned. David is actually referring here to the danger of sheep needing to be turned. And we don't understand what it means unless we understand what it means for a shepherd to look for sheep that have become what they would call cast. C-A-S-T. A cast sheep is an Old English term that translated what David is referring to here. It's a sheep that has turned over on its back, and it cannot get up on its feet again. Philip Keller, a former shepherd, wrote, here's how it happens. A heavy or long-fleeced sheep will lie down comfortably in some little hollow or depression in the ground. It may roll over on its side to stretch or relax, and suddenly the center of gravity in the body shifts so that it rolls on its back far enough that the feet no longer touch the ground. It feels a sense of panic. It starts to paw the air, which only makes things worse. It rolls over even further, and now it is impossible for the sheep to regain its footing. Keller went on to describe that sheep are like insects. We wouldn't conceive of this, but if they roll over on their back, they, like insects you may have seen, can only wiggle their feet in the air and can do nothing to help themselves. The problem for sheep is that gases begin to build up in the rumen. I had to look that up. The rumen is a compartment of the stomach, forestomach actually in sheep and other ruminating animals, where partially digested food effectively ferments in acid as they break down. It's a long way of saying an upside-down sheep is not a good thing. So here they are, flat on their backs, waving their feet helplessly in the air, unable to turn back over, and feeling worse as time goes. In fact, Keller added, if the weather is hot and sunny, the process accelerates, and a cast sheep can die in a few hours. Even sooner if wild animals find them in this particular place. And so a shepherd will daily, in fact every morning, search the sky for circling vultures. He will go out and look for cast sheep and then turn them over and set them back up on their feet. In fact, for the sheep, there is only one solution: the shepherd. An alert shepherd. So David is saying we happen to have an omniscient shepherd who doesn't have to look for vultures. He knows exactly where it is in our lives where we are now flat on our backs. We've fallen. We're in trouble. And we need to be restored. As you know, sheep are always getting into trouble. You just knew that from things you've heard, I'm sure. Timothy Laniak provoked my thinking as he writes in his journal on experiences working with Middle Eastern shepherds. He said that even the hardy mountain breed push their heads through fences, get cut or stuck. They climb up on trees to pick at foliage, get hung up by their horns or their legs. They fall down banks. They get bitten by snakes and stung by wasps. They tumble into ponds. They gorge themselves on fallen ash leaves. They roll on their backs and swell up like balloons. Listen to this. But every affliction sheep face can be countered by a good shepherd. That's what David is saying. He restores my soul. In fact, you get the personal impression of his testimony. He's saying, I happen to have Yahweh as my shepherd who is ever ready and ever available, time after time again, when I've gotten tangled or stuck, and he stands me back on my feet. Now, it's interesting to me, and this is a little rabbit trail that we're not going to chase very far, but in Galatians chapter 6, we're actually encouraged to join the shepherd in this process. We are his eyes, hands, and feet as well. When we see another believer who gets entangled in sin, Paul writes, you who are spiritual, restore such a one in the spirit of gentleness. In fact, it reveals that we really don't understand the heart of our shepherd. We have the idea that when a Christian falls, or when they get stuck, or trapped, that God gets frustrated. That God gets disgusted with that particular member of the flock, or fed up. And he says something like, that's 8 times this week I've had to turn you back over and stand you on your feet. If you ever get to 10, you're in trouble. That isn't the heart of a shepherd. A shepherd is constantly on the lookout for sheep that need to be stood back up, ready and willing. In fact, you ought to notice the pronoun he effectively testifies here. Did you notice? He restores my soul. David is saying, I know what it's like to be a cast sheep. And he puts me back on my feet. Now look at the next phrase in verse 3. He leads me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. I love the Hebrew language here. Paths could be rendered wagon tracks if you track it back in its etymology. Literally, you could woodenly render it ruts. He leads me in the ruts of righteousness. Part of the problem in the Christian life is understanding the fact that we're always either traveling in a rut or we're creating a new rut. We are creatures of habit. We drive the same way to work, to school. You walk the same way. Everything's the same. You eat the same way. You get dressed in the same way. We're walking with these patterns and these habits. The question is, are they righteous ruts? In other words, are they rightness with God in everything we do? David writes, you can always identify the paths of the Lord then. They are paths or habits, they're ruts of rightness with God. Ruts of righteousness. The trouble is, we're not sensitive to even the smallest things. They form patterns, habits. I can remember my youngest daughter, when she was about 6, riding along with me in my pickup truck, which every pastor ought to have, Chevy pickup truck. Anyhow, she's about 6 years of age, and I taught her how to read the speedometer, which I should never have done. What was I thinking? And so she's sitting over there, and eventually it's a 45-mile-an-hour road, and she says, Daddy, you're doing almost 60. And I said, uh-huh. And then I had taught her to read signs, and she said, this speed limit sign says 45. And then she said, will a policeman stop us? I said, honey, 45 is kind of like a guideline. All right, I slowed down. On another day, we're driving along, and the light turned yellow, and I accelerated. Just in perfect innocence, she looks over at me, and she says, Daddy, does yellow mean speed up? I said, yes, it does, honey. Now be quiet and go back to coloring. No, one of the reasons we've been given the Holy Spirit is that the Holy Spirit does internally what my daughter was doing externally. It's that little voice that says, you know what, you're getting into a rut here, and this pattern is not right. It isn't rightness with God. Be careful. He will lead you in the ruts of righteousness. Notice the next verse. Even though I walk in the valley of the shadow of death. Would you notice David does not write even if I walk. No. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death. Why? I'm not afraid because you are with me. Would you notice the shift in his pronouns from he to you? So far it's been he makes me lie down. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me. Now it's you. You are with me. David's talking about the intimacy of fellowship. You are with me. Isn't it true that you're never more conscious, never more grateful for the presence of your shepherd than when you're in a valley? Notice David doesn't write here, even though I walk through the valley of death. He writes, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death. Keep in mind, you cannot have a shadow without a source of light nearby. This is an implication then that the shepherd is present. Our good shepherd, who is the light of the world, is present, which then makes possible a shadow. And also keep in mind that a shadow then can't really do any lasting damage, can it? The shadow of a wolf cannot grab a sheep. The shadow of a bear cannot keep a lamb. So he's saying here, the shadow of death cannot grip you. It can't keep you. That's why it's merely a shadow. The late Donald Gray Barnhouse pastored for many years in the Philadelphia area, and while pastoring, he experienced the sudden death of his wife, and they had 3 small children at the time. They were on their way to the graveside after the funeral when he and his children pulled up to a stoplight, and then next to them pulled up this 18-wheeler, this big truck. And it blocked the sunlight coming into their car. It pulled them effectively into a shadow. And God gave Barnhouse just this great illustration to help his children. He said when he pulled away from the stoplight and he was driving, he said, "Children, back there at the stoplight, did you notice how that big truck pulled beside us?" They said, "Yes, sir, we did, Daddy." "Did you notice how the shadow of that truck then kind of came over our car?" And they said, "Yes, sir, we did. We noticed that." He said, "Kids, did that shadow hurt us? No. Did that shadow keep us? No, it didn't." And he said, "Kids, the Bible says that we walk through the valley of the shadow of death. Death didn't hurt your mother, and it didn't hold her back either." In fact, we know from Paul's letter to the Corinthians, to be absent from the body is to be immediately present with the Lord. That's why I love the fact that he refers to the valley of death as a shadow. Now he moves on to tell us there are two things which comfort him. In verse 4, notice he refers first of all to the rod, the shepherd's rod. "You're with me, your rod comforts me." Now a rod for a shepherd was about 2 feet long. They'd pull out of the ground a young sapling, and then they would skin off the branches, and they'd shape the root end, they'd smooth it out and carve it, and then they'd pound stones into that round knobby end. We know that David killed wild animals, including at least one lion and at least one bear, with that club. It's interesting, as you study, you discover that in ancient days, kings were shown in excavations holding a shepherd's rod. It was a symbol of authority. It was a symbol of power. And you go back into Mesopotamia and Egyptian history, and you find these kings, pharaohs, holding a shepherd's rod. In fact, I found in my research one document written by an Assyrian king that has been discovered, who reigned 1,200 years before the birth of Jesus Christ, who wrote, listen to this, "I am the true shepherd who through the justice of my rod keeps people and communities in order." Now, over the centuries, the shepherd's rod morphs into a royal scepter. In fact, in Psalm chapter 2, David prophesies that the Messiah will one day rule the nations with a rod of what? Remember? A rod of iron. A shepherd's rod, although it's made of iron. In other words, he is invincible. Now, another aspect of the shepherd's rod was the care of the sheep. It was easy to assume that sheep looked good. They were okay. In fact, the shepherd in our church that I mentioned yesterday told me that sheep, you don't even know how poorly they're doing until they die. And one of the things you have to do is you have to inspect them for problems, external problems, parasites. And what they'll do is they will bring their sheep under the rod. That is, they'll use their rod to part the wool and to take a look at things that might create trouble. It's interesting, even today I read in sheep shows, the wool of sheep can be clipped and shaped to make it appear stronger and larger than it really is. So the judge will take a rod and part the sheep's wool to get a realistic view. And from this comes our phrase, pulling the wool over someone's eyes. So they'll bring them under the rod to take a look. Now, David also mentions the staff, your rod and your staff. They comfort me. Also a young sapling, they'll take the end of it, they'll heat it, rub it with oil, bend it over so that it hardens in the shape of a crook. The rod demonstrates authority and power. The staff represents care and assistance. One author wrote that the staff, the crook end, will be useful in pulling down branches so that his animals can eat the leaves. He'll rescue animals out of bogs, mud, pits, fences. The staff would be used to guide the sheep. In fact, one author wrote that he often watched in the Middle East as shepherds walked along with their sheep. Beside a sheep, he would gently rest his staff on the back of some sheep, literally keeping him in touch, he wrote, as if they were holding hands. In other words, the Lord doesn't say, you see that dark, long valley over there? You start out over here and you work your way through it, and I'll meet you when you come out the other side. No. He effectively says, we're going to go through this together. So no wonder David sings then, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. Why? You are with me. Your rod and your staff. They both hold me accountable. They represent my authority. And you hold my hand. You comfort me. Jesus Christ is the perfect shepherd. By the way, our world is shopping around. We have found there's none better than Him. We'll pick it up at the next verse tomorrow morning. God bless you. You're dismissed.